Well, hello, friends. Welcome to another edition of My View from the Pew. I'm Rodney Blockett, and as always, I'm grateful and thankful for you stopping by the channel today. So, we're continuing to grow in numbers. So, if you could subscribe and like to the channel, that just helps us grow more and gives me an opportunity to get more content out there. So, hope you're enjoying the videos. I would love to hear any kind of feedback or comments. Those of you who know me, feel free to text me or email me, but just leave a comment on the videos. Would love to get your feedback. So today's video, as you can tell by the title, is a little bit, I don't want to say misleading, but it's going to be an interesting discussion, one-sided discussion, because it's just me right now. But we're going to talk a little bit about kind of what we do in worship as far as the church is concerned, and how we look at what we're doing with the church today. So this will be kind of my view from the pew, as the title of the channel indicates. And it may end up being at the end of the video, you may say, well, this is just Rodney being a grumpy old man. But hopefully there'll be some discussion come out of this, and I'd love to get your comments on it. So as you know, I mentioned before that I help out with a friend of mine doing security at some of the churches. Some of that is armed uniform security. Some of that is, plainclothes security, just helping out where we can. But it always gives me an opportunity to kind of stand in the background, I guess, and observe what's going on. And one of my pet peeves, as you guys know, sometimes goes around the music and the worship that we have anymore in today's. And that's a whole nother video that we'll probably talk about in the future. But it's really about priorities and what we're doing with our time, the limited time we have. So if you look at a church service, most of them start either 8:30, and 10 and 11:30. Okay, so the first 15 minutes of it is the worship service, and for a variety of different reasons, people love the worship service, or they're not a big fan anymore of it because it becomes more performative service than it is a participation service. And if you've been to a larger church, you kind of know what I mean. Is that you'll have really, it's almost like you're going to a concert, and then the decibel level is that, close to the space shuttle. And so you really can't hear, even if you were singing. And so you're just kind of watching, and, we've got smoke machines and lights, and everything's dark and everyone's standing. It's just kind of some people love it. Some people, it's just a little different. But I will say that the worship team works really hard throughout the week to prepare for the worship service, for those. And so what I typically see, and I think this is common in several churches, I've seen it a lot of different ones, is, worship service starts, the doors are still open for the first, few minutes, and there's a ton of people outside in the hallways, at the coffee shops, another topic we'll talk about at some point in time, just sitting around talking to each other. They're still getting out of their cars. They're coming in the doors, and 5-10 minutes later, they just kind of roam in. And they're just standing out there, and the worship team, who spent all week working on, being the best they can to help facilitate worship, they're kind of a second fiddle, I guess, so to speak, or back seat to where our priorities are. Our priorities were supposed to be, I'm coming to church to worship. The worship service is part of that, and the sermon and everything that I get out of the church service. But it's kind of like, well, I'll get there when I get there, and I really don't care if the worship service. That's what you're portraying. I won't say you're saying that, but that's really what you're portraying. Is I don't really care about the worship service. I don't really care about the effort that they put in, because I'll just come and when I want to, and I got to make sure I get my coffee. Got to make sure I talk to a handful of people, and I know that church starts at 10, but if I get there at 10:15, should be fine. It's not a priority. So what does that tell us about, where our hearts are and where our priorities are? And a lot of people are going to say, well, Rodney, well, you don't understand. We got kids to get ready, and we've got this or that. But you know what? If you had to get your kids ready for school every day, which most people do, I don't think the teachers are going to say, well, you can just come in whenever you want. If it's 10 or 15 minutes after the fact, that's fine. Not a problem. We'll wait for you, or we'll just continue on. Your child can get whenever you want. Or if you're at work and you've got to be there at a certain time, they say, well, be here at 9 o'clock. It's like, no, I'll get there 9:10, 9:15, 9:30. It should be fine. Don't worry about it what time I get there. You're sending a message that what the priorities are for you. And of all the things that we should be doing, if our priority is to worship and to be with other Christians and to worship God and to, be in His presence. And our thought process is, well, I'll just get there when I get there. It should be fine. Don't tell me how I should worship or what I should do. Um, I've kidded around several times. If I were, I use a expression a lot. If I were king, but if I were king, I would close and lock the doors to the worship to the sanctuary at 10 o'clock. That's when the service starts, and if you're not there, you don't get in. It's like, well, that's kind of harsh, but really, of any place that you should be early, should be church. Should be, I want to get there early. I want to be a part. I want to make sure that I'm there when the worship service starts. I want to be there when the pastor brings the message. I want to be there to see what, baptisms or whatever's going on that week. I want to be there instead. And, I see a lot of people, both parishioners and staff, and a lot of people, they're just, kind of milling around out in the hallways, just chit-chatting away and talking, not a care in the world, knowing that they were there for the worship service, they were there for church, but it's kind of a second priority to them. May not be a second, I'd say that. It seems as if it's a second priority in that I'll get there when I get there. So, I've had another video talking about, just get me on to church on time, but really, what is, by your actions, what are you portraying or what are you saying to the worship team, to the minister, to the staff, to those who have prepared, for you to come into God's house to worship? What are you saying by ignoring that or coming in whenever you want, or just, making your priorities are all out of whack, so to speak? So probably not what everyone wants to hear on that. That's just my observation, just kind of looking. Again, sometimes it's nice to be able to do security because you can sit back and kind of look at a lot of things. But when the doors are open and the worship team is playing and the music's going, and you see as many people filing in and milling around and going in 5, 10, 15 minutes after the fact than there are in the sanctuary, that's got to send a message to the worship team. If nothing else, they're there working all week to try to make the best service possible, and they see a half-empty congregation, and then as they're going along, they see people kind of coming in, meaning that the worship service is not that important to those people. So I would encourage you, to evaluate, why you're there, and again, if there's issues with the music being too loud, if there's issues with something else, that's something else that altogether that can be addressed. But, I would encourage you to look at your watch, and if it's church starts at 10, pretend like the church starts at 9:45 and get there at 9:45 or 9:50 and be in there early and be ready to worship, because God wants you in His presence to worship, but not in the hallway for the first 15 minutes. So anyway, let me know what you think. I'd love to hear your comments, but that's my view from the pew.